Deathpixie disclaimer. This video was originally recorded in September 2024. There is swearing and profanity. Sources are listed in the description. This video is not monetized. Any ads you see provide revenue to the hosting site, not the creators. If you made it this far, geez, you have a lot of patience.
Dance Pixie, dancing on the lip of madness!
Welcome to Shitty PowerPoint Theater. Dignity not included.
We are going to be moving into World War I, which gets us into interesting things with leaders in general, but in particular Canada. So remember, this is the first World War where Canada enters as Canada. This is the first, it's the first World War. It's the first war that we are entering as Canada, basically. So I am talking about Sir Robert Laird Borden. Now, you will notice Conservative Party, Unionist Party. The Unionist Party was created by him from Conservative and Liberal Party members, and this was in response to the war. Because the idea was all hands are on deck here. We need all opinions, all sides. That's what's happening right now. See his term, so he went from 1911 to 1920. Had a decent life, and his wife Laura Bond did outlive him. And again, they did not have any children. I should say surviving children. I was kind of only counting those who survived to birth. But there were further details in the research about like if there were miscarriages and et cetera, but no children. Now then, there is a lot here, and it is all war related. So there's a bit of context that I'll give, but I do want to talk about that we originally started with no conscription, and it was a volunteer force during the war. And then at the peace conference, Borden actually sought to expand the autonomy of Canada and other dominions, which actually opened up to more of the dominions having an increased say. Nationalized the railways by establishing the Canadian National Railway. There were new taxes. Some were for the war, some were general income tax. These are all of the acts that we had related to the war. So we have the Military Voters Act, the Dominion Elections Act, the Wartime Elections Act, and Military Voters Act, and then the Grain Act of 1912 as well. There was a Canadian Patriotic Fund, which was basically social assistance to families of the soldiers, because remember, men were viewed as the breadwinners. Men were the ones who were allowed to have jobs outside of the home for the most part. And even if women got jobs outside of the home, they were not making the same amount of money. So there needed to be some assistance given to reflect that loss in income. He did start the Board of Grain Supervisors of Canada. This is cool. The Statistics Act, which was the start of Statistics Canada, came into effect here. He did introduce women's suffrage for federal elections. There was the Halifax explosion, and he created the Halifax Relief Commission in response to that. And he also created the National Research Council of Canada for Scientific and Industrial Research. Pro or con, there was the War Measures Act.
Yeah.
You kind of need it in times of war. This was World War I. It's kind of neither here nor there.
Yeah. We had no history to go off of.
No. There were issues with Newfoundland representation and precedence in Paris ahead of the Treaty of Versailles. His push for Canada to be recognized, which goes back into what he did at the Paris conference, actually meant that Newfoundland, Australia, New Zealand, India, etc., had representation as well. So it wasn't necessarily what he directly wanted. He was coming from a Canadian perspective, but it led to them having that representation. Please recognize Newfoundland was its separate thing at this point in time. So the conscription crisis. There was an incident when conscription came into effect. The Canadian government had ended up deploying 1,200 soldiers to suppress the Quebec City anti-conscription Easter riots in March and April 1918. It was a very bloody conflict. It ended with armed rioters firing on troops and the soldiers returning fire. At least 5 men were killed by gunfire, and there were over 150 casualties and $300,000 worth of damage. We also had 8,500 Ukrainian Canadians who were interred under the War Measures Act. This involved forcible labor, seizure of assets which were not returned, and a little over 100 died. The act that I was talking about for the Canadian Grain Act, it was to assist farmers who would have benefited from reciprocity with the U.S. The Board of Grain Supervisors, basically what they're trying to do is to distance marketing of crops away from private grain companies, and that was succeeded by the Canadian Wheat Board as well, and that board was dissolved in 1920 despite being very popular among farm organizations, and that's going to come up later. There was using the Northwest Mounted Police, later to become the RCMP, to break up a Winnipeg general strike.
Yeah.
If we've said it before, we've said it again, we're very pro-labor, and like I said, I do not like seeing things that are meant to serve the people being used against the people. I don't like that.
Yeah.
One more thing. During the 1920s, the government began purchasing church-run boarding schools. During this period, capital costs associated with the schools were assumed by the government, leaving administrative and industrial duties to the church officials. The hope was that minimizing facility expenditures would allow church administrators to provide higher quality instruction and support to the students in their care. So this was their attempt to try and resolve some of the issues going on in the residential schools. It didn't work.
No.
Anyway, I have not either the experience or the qualifications which would enable me to successfully lead the party. It would be absurd for the party and madness for me, which I always thought was interesting.
Yeah.
In opposition, he proposed for railways to be government-owned and government-operated, stating that people would have a choice between a government-owned railway or a railway-owned government. Called for the reform of Senate and civil service, wanted more selective immigration policy, free rural mail delivery, government regulations of telegraphs, telephones, and railways, and eventual national ownership of telegraphs and telephones. Which, you know, if that had happened, imagine not having the monopoly that we have on cell phone service. Like,
Yeah.
Imagine if we didn't have that. There is a note to be made on World War I. When the British declared war, it automatically brought Canada into the war, just because of how our relationship was at the time. There were no ifs, ands, or buts. We had to be involved in it. And then again, remember, he led a party made up of liberals and conservatives. That it's a prime example of, this is bigger than all of us, guys.
Yep.
It's not about our party now. This is about the war and getting us through this. So, at the end of everything, he did record in his diary that he was very tired, and his retirement meant wildflower gardening with his wife.
Which was, that's actually very wholesome, and you kind of have to love it.
Like, that's nice. I love the fact that he was part of St. Andrew's Lodge of British Templars. Like, what the heck?
There we go.
Did you think you were going to see a Templar here? Because I didn't
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
He has a lot of quotes that are very much World War I quotes. So, for example, Canada got nothing out of the war except recognition. That was a letter to his wife. He would say of his time in politics, "It is a miserable, irregular life one has to leave, and I am more than sick of it, I can assure you." So that was another to his wife about politics. It can hardly be expected that we shall put 400,000 or 500,000 men in the field and willingly accept the position of having no more voice and receiving no more consideration than if we were toy automata. That is him arguing for why we needed to have a voice and a place, because you can't just, accept all of these Canadians and just tell them what to do without any say and any autonomy in how they're involved. With that responsibility, there has come something greater still, the opportunity of proving ourselves worthy of it. I pray that this may not be lost. So you can tell he got tired. War is not fun. Yeah. Now the CV. Look at that moose. Aren't you happy now? We spoke about World War I.
That is a sexy moose.
So he was actually a professor for classics and mathematics. He did articles of clerkship for 4 years at a Halifax law firm. He became a prominent barrister in Nova Scotia and went from junior to senior partner at the same firm. He was a Freemason. He represented a lot of Halifax businesses on boards of various Nova Scotian companies, including the Bank of Nova Scotia and the Crown Life Insurance Company. As a lawyer, he had notable clients like the Bank of Nova Scotia, the Canada Atlantic Steamship, the Nova Scotia Telephone Company. He was the president of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society. So there's a lot of involvement here. Eventually goes to House of Commons, becomes an MP. Goes to House of Commons as an MP, participated on many House committees, leader of the opposition, then Prime Minister. He was, after being a Prime Minister, he was Chancellor of Queen's University, the Barclays Bank of Canada, and the Crown Life Insurance Company. He was president of until his death. He was on the board. He was president of the Canadian Historical Association. He was also a delegate to the 1921 and 1922 Washington Naval Conference. And he was the chairman of Canada's first mutual fund, the Canadian Investment Fund. But yeah, it was wildflower gardening with his wife.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right. Good for you.
You can't hate him.
No. Now, before we move on to somebody who we've talked about quite a bit, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Honestly, I would have liked to have seen Borden as Prime Minister outside of wartime.
Yeah.
Because a lot of his actions, both positive and negative, can be attributed to the war, where he's kind of ham-fisted by the Brits.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of his stuff, because let's be honest here, it's a First World War. We as a nation are fairly new in the grand scheme of things. It's an unprecedented time. Of course it's going to be a time of high stress. Of course he's going to be divisive. I would like to see him during peacetime, what he would have been like as a Prime Minister, in order to adequately and fairly judge him.
That's a good point.
Hey, this is Trapdoor Crabsworth for deathpixie. If you liked our content, please like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see more, just check out our links in the description. Do it. Do it or Miri will kill you.